Luka and the Mavs beat Wemby and the Spurs on Tuesday, just barely. Afterwards, Jason Kidd said, yeah, it does count as a W, but not all wins are pretty. He was not kidding here. Luka had another triple-double, 8 triple-doubles in his last 10 games. This one, though, wasn't too fantastic. He shot just 6 of 27 from the floor. It's just the 6th time in his career, Bill, that he's been worse than 25% from the field with regular minutes. Is this the kind of performance that gives the Luka doubters a little fuel for the fire?
I think it does. And look, I'm not sure that I'm one of them. I go back and forth, but I certainly talk to people that are doubters. And John, I was certainly prepared because there was a stretch there where it felt like maybe the Spurs were going to pull this game out. And Wembanyama wasn't amazing, at least in terms of his efficiency over a big stretch of that game. And Luka wasn't great in the fourth quarter. But I think it goes a little deeper. And I reached out to three different guys who work for 3 different NBA teams of different levels today to sort of get an assessment on this. Can I walk you through this a little bit? Like what's coming back? Now, it doesn't mean because all 3 of these guys are Luka doubters. Everybody is, but all three of these sources came up as scouts. 2 of them are much higher than that now. One of them is still a scout. And I think it distills down to a few things, and we've talked about it. One is his usage rate. And I know that you had noted, we had talked before the show, it is huge. Is it 36%?
It is the
right?
highest usage rate in the NBA in the non-Joel Embiid division.
So the sort of the synthetic, like if you synthesize that for what I was told, it's the idea that players that aren't great or good players, right? Players that don't create betterment for their teammates, better outcomes for their actual teammates. The AI model is what one guy said doesn't work in the modern NBA. That's one. So the usage rate, the idea doesn't work. He's clearly a defensive liability. That is true. There's a lot of wear and tear that goes on a guy over the course of an 82-game season when you just have to have the ball in your hands that often. You have to generate that much of the offense. So there's a worry that maybe the Mavs are unable to be as successful as they should have been. He's only made it out of the first round one time because he just can't be the guy that he is in the regular season. But like the why of this, and I had one guy in particular sort of go deep on this that I hadn't thought of, is the idea that if you are and he kept using the term outcome-based individual rather than outcome-based for the team. If you are Luka Doncic and your outcomes are going to be individual excellence that happen to carry a team to success in the regular season, his view and the view of these other folks that I talked to, John, is it's not going to work because you have a perfect set of ingredients that make playoff basketball perfectly designed in 2024 to stop someone like Luka Doncic. High usage, not great defensively, individual star that doesn't improve guys around him. One is the fact there's a lot more practice time, so you can implement really whatever game plan you want to go at Luka Doncic. And the other, which I hadn't thought of, and the argument he made, is that in the regular season, it's a lot more of a flow in terms of the plays that you're running. Yeah, you've got things you want to do, but you've got to really be a lot more spontaneous, and it can be a lot more random. And the point that one of these sources made is if you're an Eastern Conference team and you're on a back-to-back, you're playing your 3rd game in even 6 or 7 nights, and you haven't seen Luka, you're not preparing in the regular season the way that you will in the postseason. But in the postseason, they told me, it becomes a tape-based approach, a film-based approach, and that the ability to get on film, to look at Luka, to know what he's going to do, to understand you just have to stop him, to understand Kyrie's got a high usage rate too, that the other teammates aren't used to having to carry the load or make some of these big shots. All of that combined, this idea, and they sort of sold me on it. I am sold that Luka Doncic is a great individual player. But in the modern game against better teams and better coaches where the film really matters and the game shifts in the playoffs, that is why there are doubters. And they would argue that is why Luka is not going to be successful in the postseason this year and maybe in years ahead.
Yeah, it's weird because he has had a really incredible individual season. And the Mavs, as we've mentioned here on Beyond the Arc many times over the course of our long history of doing this show, have been extremely streaky this season, right? I mean, they were really hot before the break, then they were cold after the break, then they got hot again. Now, they squeak out a win against the Spurs, and it's hard to know what to really make of them because Luka has 18 total triple doubles this season, which is a franchise record, broke his own record.
It's amazing.
And they're 11-7 in those games. So they have been a winning team in those games,
right.
But over course of Luka's career, they've won like slightly north of 55% of his regular season games. So it's kind of like, all right, they're a kind of winning team, but they've only gotten out of the first round once. And as you mentioned, he is incredibly ball dominant. That usage rate, everybody knows what's happening with the Mavs. It's Luka and then to a lesser extent Kyrie. And that's really amazing too, because in addition to Luka having the highest usage rate in the NBA, he's got a higher usage rate. And again, I'm accepting Joel Embiid because he's missed so many games. Higher usage rate than Giannis, than SGA, than Ant, than Steph. Now, all of those guys, either this season or over the course of their career, have had more success winning. And then his usage rate is considerably higher than a ball dominant guy like Kyrie. So, right. I mean, everybody knows what's happening with Luka, right? And the Mavs. It's Luka's show. And if he can pull it out and play, out of his mind, they've got a good shot to win. But it does leave a lot of questions for the Mavs, less questions for the opposing team because they know who to stop. And also defensively, he's a massive minus.
Yeah, he's a huge. And by the way, so is Kyrie, and it conjures, and we've talked about this, ideas of Harden 2.0. And I talked to one guy who has been or is a GM, right? These guys like to code who they are, but has sat in that chair. And the point that he made, he walked me through all the reasons. I can read you this quote if you want, or we don't have to, but why he doesn't think it's going to work. But then he said, but I'm taking Luka Doncic the moment I can get him because the outcomes may not add up to championships, but it will add up to playoff appearances despite this year. You are going to win a lot of regular season games. There is a different thing you can do with Luka in the playoffs versus the regular season, but he's so talented, you've got to have him. And his prediction, and I think it's interesting, and again, through the prism of is Luka Harden 2.0, he pointed out, and I guess this is true, he said, all of you guys, like picking on people like me, you reporters, tried to figure out who was to blame when Harden didn't win originally, and was it the coach, and was it the front office, and then eventually he said, you, the media, turned on Harden. It became Harden can't win, and his prediction is that that's going to happen to Luka this year. He thinks Luka and the Mavs, if they're not on the play, and if they get out, don't play well in a first round series and go out, or maybe lose in a second round series, and he thinks it's going to be a very similar narrative that builds around Luka Doncic that has, I think, clearly become a thing with James Harden.
I can't believe I'm going to do this. I think this is grossly unfair to James Harden.
Oh, so does this guy, by the way. This GM guy said the same thing.
I really like Luka. Yeah, I really like Luka as an individual player. I think that the notion of if you can get Luka, would you do it? Of course you would. He's been incredible. And then you just hope to build around him and like change his fortunes in the postseason. But so far, James Harden has been grossly more successful in the postseason than Luka Doncic. He's made the conference finals not once, but twice with two different teams. And oh, by the way, he got out of the first round not once, but twice with the team over my shoulder, the Philadelphia 76ers. Luka's only ever been out of the first round one time. So, I mean, it kind of boggles my mind that I've been put into this position, but defensive James Harden, it's not a no contest, not to mention James Harden is a former MVP and Luka is not. So, I mean, like, what are we talking about right now?
It's a great point. And one of the points that was made to me that kind of set me back on my heels a little bit that you, I think, are making is one of these sources. And these are there's two guys they're watching, all three guys I respect.
Yeah, of course.
But there's two in particular who are very high level and have been pretty smart over the years, the things that we've talked about. And one of them made the point that you're making, that they're like, look, you can do the Harden 2.0. It's true, but Harden was a better version of this. And he's a better defender when he engaged, has been a better he's like, there's just a sample size of Harden succeeding. And by the way, I do think Harden is a postseason liability. I don't think James Harden has lived up to what he could do in the playoffs, given the MVP and his regular season accolades. I do remember with the Rockets when he missed, 131 consecutive 3-point shots in a really big game. There's time for Luka to change the narrative.
Would remind you that two of those they got fouled on, but yes, 135 then.
It's 135. So I think we're ahead of this, but this is a real thing. And I'll say this. I usually, when I will call folks, get some pushback because the way that I see things is very different than the way people in these front offices do. And they like to tell people like me how reporters and commentators don't know what they're talking about. I am surprised by how many people have agreed on this and how many people today that are, one's an analytics guy, one's like an old school scout, one's sort of in the middle, how universal the three people, the view is, and they claim the view is, that Luka may not be someone, just for the way that he's built and the way the game works now, who wins a lot in terms of championships, if any, which is interesting.
Yeah. And I think, his postseason record is what it is. So when you're comparing apples to apples with Harden, it's just like not as good so far, despite the fact that I think that Harden has been frequently a no-show in the postseason, like he was last season when the Sixers faced the Celtics. But I did go back and look at his clutch numbers from this year. They're 18-7 with him in the clutch. He's plus 52 in the clutch. He's shooting 46.5% this season in the clutch, which is about the same mark as PG and Jalen Brunson. And it's better than Devin Booker, Dame, who is known for his clutch time performances, Dame time, Don Mitchell, Ant Edwards, Kawhi, and Harden, our guy Harden that we're mentioning. So Luka, despite the fact that it hasn't translated to postseason success, he has been good when it matters in close games. So take that for what it's worth.
I was just very good. I just said the general point. Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, the view of the people I talk to, not every person in the NBA is that will shift in the playoffs because it is easier to stop a Luka Doncic than it might be a team with lesser stars or a couple. Like, I don't think Tatum is on the same level as Doncic as an individual. And it's a bad example because of how loaded Boston is. But even before Drew Holiday and Porzingis came in, that team might be harder to stop because there are more guys who can hurt you, and it's harder to plan for that in the playoffs.